Thank everybody for coming. Thank you. It's nice to be able to talk here with a microphone, so I don't have to strain my voice. I first of all want to thank the speakers who have committed for tonight. Very brave of you. And specifically to one of you who's never done public speaking since high school, who will remain nameless. Thank you. Thank you. You'll go first right after me so that you can get it out of the way. In the last few years, especially in the 2 years of COVID, we had Zoom events on Tisha B'Av, each one of them that attracted a large crowd. And what we did is we found people who had been through something intense that year, but had yet managed to find incredible strength. And they shared their story. And unfortunately, the last few years, it hasn't been very hard to find the people. This year, it was harder to find the people willing to share their story. So, thank you for those who agreed to it. I'm going to start by just checking to see if the sound over here. That's computer's making some sounds, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to start my presentation by telling you why I feel like Noah after the flood. That was the title of my presentation. I want you to imagine Noah. For the ladies who've been by my share in the last few weeks, we've explored it a bit. According to the Torah, about 1600 years after Adam and Eve were born, God threw a flood in the year 1636. And in this flood, he literally destroyed every human being on the face of the planet, besides Noah, his wife. His name was Noah. His wife's name was Naamah. Their 3 sons who we know, their 3 wives who we don't know, and that's it. 8 people survived the flood. And according to tradition, the big giant flood, whatever, 9 people. Muslim. Now, Noah walked onto the ark when the world was still relatively normal. It was raining outside, but he had lots of friends and relatives and uncles and aunties and grandparents. He goes onto this ark, and in this ark, he has to spend every day for a year feeding animals, keeping everybody alive. He gets bitten by a lion, according to tradition. It's an absolute nightmare. If you don't, if you want to see the Hollywood version, there is a movie called Noah. It's not nearly very accurate, but it does give you kind of an imagination of how crazy things went. The whole world goes to the dogs. And a year later, the flood's over, the water recedes, and God comes and tells Noah, "Say minat teva, go out of the ark." He does so reluctantly. According to the Torah, he didn't want to come out. Even though it was miserable inside, he was terrified of what he'd find on the outside. But he has no choice, he comes out. And what does he find? As much as he knew what to expect, he couldn't imagine. He sees Noah. The world is gone. Not a building standing, not a relative alive, nothing. Like the first man landing on Mars. Absolutely nothing. But in Mars, he never had anyone. Over here, a year earlier, he had a whole society. Shows up nobody. So what does he do? He plants a vineyard and gets it home. That's what the Torah says, right? It doesn't end too well. His child violates him, and it's not a pretty story by any stretch. But what does he do? He comes out of the ark and he gets himself drunk. Now, I'm not like Noah because I don't drink, but I do sometimes feel like Noah in the last few months, because COVID in similar ways was God coming and saying, go into an ark. If you don't want to think it was God saying it, it was the government saying it, who cares? The point is, you went into an ark, you locked yourself up, and you sat in an alternate reality, which was COVID. And you developed new hobbies, which included not getting dressed and, and not exercising and not doing a lot of things that were normal and taking on new things and starting to daven on Zoom, etc., etc. And then God comes at some stage and says, start integrating back into society. It was only like 2 months ago when we're like, okay, you can take your masks off and move on. But it wasn't as quick as Noah, go out. It was a year and plus minus. And we struggled. We've struggled as a society to re-enter the world, because the world we walked out, although thank God a lot of our families here, unfortunately we lost a lot of people as well. But more importantly, the world's changed. We've changed. Our mental health has changed. Our anxiety has changed. And the same God that comes and says, go to the ark, also says, come out of the ark and rebuild the world. And we have to make sure that we don't do like Noah. We don't get ourselves drunk. We don't look for escape. In modern day, I would say drunkenness to be alcohol, but it could also be Netflix or any other escape that we find. Because while Noah is very understood, we could totally understand why he made the choices he made. Ultimately, it didn't work. His son violated him. He cursed his son. It was an absolute nightmare, total dysfunction. So my challenge tonight, after hearing, please God, 3 amazing speakers, is that we hear their stories and we obviously will identify with their arc, but also how they've come out of their arc, going with passion to rebuild a better world. Our first speaker, Ari Bailey, just had her father's yahrzeit today, and her husband's yahrzeit 2 weeks ago. They died 2 weeks apart, and her husband, Alan, who died from COVID at a young age with no preconditions, was a blow to the family and a blow to the community. And not having known the Baileys very well, till then, we got to know each other incredibly well. And for me, their story is not of waking up the next day with a big smile on their face, but rather walking into the grief and into the pain intensely, a double wham, and then over the year, finding the strength to face another day with a smile. So I would please. Take the mic.
Up until around the 28th of June last year, I had a beautiful, healthy, happy family, a close-knit, bonded unit that made us so proud. And then it got turned on its head. At the tender age of 16 and 19, Alan and I met each other. We knew from early on that we were meant to be together. 8 years later, we got married and went on to have 3 beautiful children, and a happy and fulfilled life and marriage. Our lives revolved around each other, our children, and our extended family. We spent in total 36 years together, making beautiful memories. Last June, my family and I all got COVID. We were pretty sick, but we were okay until the 28th of June, when Alan took a terrible turn and landed in hospital. I must have known in my heart that this wasn't going to end well, because for the first time ever, I messaged Rabbi Afton. I had a feeling that he needed to know this. Alan became the subject of many Tehillim groups, and it seemed like he was getting better until he wasn't. He passed away peacefully on the 5th of July, 26th of Tisha. After visiting him that afternoon and seeing the most amazing lines of light shining through the window onto his arm, looking exactly like Tefillin, I knew that Hashem was with him. I just didn't think it was to take him from us. Our happy, beautiful family was shattered. The strong, loving, beautiful Alan was gone. We had no idea how we were going to move ahead without him. In my head, I knew what was happening, but I could not make any sense of it. I still don't think I can. We went through the motions of the funeral and we started sitting Shiva. It was such a meaningful time. The four of us sat together physically, emotionally, and spiritually from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, surrounded from morning till night by our angels, our family, our friends, the rabbi, the community, and people we barely knew. We had illegal prayers because we were in lockdown, and it was quite amazing because these guys that came to make up the minyan were actually at risk of being caught for an illegal gathering, but at least Ilan got to say Kaddish. Just then, when we thought nothing could get any worse, my father had a tragic fall on the third day of our Shiva. He was in hospital, unconscious, unresponsive, and ventilated with very little hope of any kind of recovery. My extended family and I sat together waiting for news about my dad. And even when our Shiva for Alan was over, it felt pretty much like we were still sitting Shiva. He hung on until after our Shiva was over and passed away 10 days after Alan had on Tisha B'Av. He was buried exactly 2 weeks after Alan to the minute. He loved Alan like his own son, so it was fitting that he was buried right in front of Alan, with nobody between them. We then entered our second Shiva. After 2 Shivas and what felt like an eternity, we had to try and emerge and try to start to build a new life. During our Shivas, we spent many hours with Rabbi Afton trying to understand and believe that it was both of their times. Alan at a young, healthy 55 years, but with a whole life ahead of him. And my dear father at a healthy and fulfilled almost 90 years. These hours with the Rabbi were the starting point of our healing. None of us, not myself nor my children, had ever felt any anger around Alan's death. We know that he fought as hard as he could, and we know that he would have done anything he could have not to leave us. And we know that his death was part of Hashem's greater plan, so there was not really anybody to be angry with. From the day of Alan's funeral, I made a conscious decision that I would get out of bed every day, even on the days that I didn't really want to. I had to do this for my children, for Alan, and for me. Some days were hard, others were harder, but I knew what I had to do. Life started to make we started to take on some kind of new normality. Gabby went back to school, Danny went to varsity, Ilan went to work, and I had a renovation to complete as the entire living area of our home was gutted, which is why we sat Shiva in Alan's favorite spots, the patio. All the things I used to do with Alan and discuss with him, I was now doing on my own. Discussing this with my children or my sister wasn't the same, but it had to be done. I then started meeting with old friends and some new friends and started becoming very aware of people's energy. I was very mindful to try and surround myself with people who fed me with their positive energy. I've always been a positive person, but I wasn't sure how I was going to find this positivity now. I started becoming aware of beauty that surrounded me. Beautiful sunsets, flowers blooming in the garden, birds nesting in the tree. From this, I started seeing that there was indeed positivity and light. I went back to teaching because I knew that I needed that. The children that I teach do so much to feed my soul and make me feel fulfilled. It's been just over a year, probably the hardest and saddest year of any of our lives. But I have been surrounded by such profound love and positivity that I am seeing the light. I had never adulted on my own. I always did it with Alan. So I'm learning to adult and to parent on my own. But he was the kind of partner who empowered me and encouraged me. And I know he continues to do that. I have learned that I will never be both parents to our children. I will always just be their mother. Alan was the only person who could be their father. And he always will be there, guarding them and protecting them. We learned that family was not only those to whom you are connected by blood, but those to whom you are connected by love. We had to learn to accept and to give, both physically and emotionally. We received so much from the community, from family, from friends, and from even complete strangers. And it is so rewarding to give back in whichever way we can. On the night before our 28th wedding anniversary, I decided I wouldn't get up the next morning. I didn't really feel like it, just wanted to stay in bed. The next morning, my children came in and told me that they'd bought an apple tree and that we were going to plant a garden in honor of Alan. How could I not get up for that? I've learned that my children need me. They need a strong me. They need somebody who will be there for them and have their backs no matter what. They need a mom who can hold our beautiful, strong, special family together. The lessons that we have learned are not to take anything for granted. We are in control of very little. All we are in control of is how we perceive our lives and how we live them. I've learned to count my blessings every day. Fortunately, I have children, a mother, sisters, niece, nephews who always make sure that I'm okay. And if I'm not okay, they hold me until I'm a little bit more okay. Try not to have regrets. They are pointless. Tell the people you love that you love them. Do what you need to do because we are not guaranteed of tomorrow to do or say these things. I can happily say that I have few regrets. Ellen and I lived our lives loving each other and our children so deeply, respecting each other and valuing each other. I have learned that I am blessed to have experienced a love in the way that I did. In fact, I often used to say, I wonder what I'd done to deserve being married to a man who treated me like his princess with such love and respect. Someone who would drop anything for me and our children. Unfortunately, I've paid the ultimate price for having experienced such love, the enormous pain and the loss of that love. But I keep going by thinking how blessed I was to have experienced a love that many have never. Grief brings you closer to those who have experienced it, but often distances you from those who haven't. Grief is experienced so differently by everyone. Not everyone's grief is the same. The thing we do constantly is speak about Ellen and my dad, what they would do, what they would order at a restaurant, things they'd love to see, reactions that they would have. In that way, we keep their memories alive. I know that there will always be a part of me that will be sad. There will always be a part of me that will be grateful that I had a life that I did, and that my children will always live their lives knowing what is right and what is good, because Ellen made sure of that. Some days are still unbearably sad. Some are more bearable. Sometimes I will pass a place or walk into a shop or a restaurant and it hits me like a punch in the stomach. But it's okay, because it means I remember not only the place or the event, but the emotions as well. I know that I've experienced such immensely deep pain, but I also know that I've experienced such beauty and such love, and that I continue to do so every day. I wake up every morning, and no matter how I'm feeling, I know that I'm blessed and that Alan is always watching over us.
What incredible wisdom. And Ari, thanks for coming with your whole heart and sharing it. Our next speaker, Raz Vasrati, a radio host, an inspirational speaker and author, and also someone that unfortunately in your life, you lost your husband to a car accident in the past year. Wishing you long life, and if you could please share your thoughts with us.
I know I'm not supposed to greet anybody, because of the night that it is. I find that very difficult because my love of humanity is so huge. And all I want to do is embrace every person I see. And somehow or other, losing somebody so special to me has enhanced it. I believe, Ariella, I don't know you. You've touched me so deeply. To go through loss so close together must be impossible. You'll notice that I walked up here with a white lily and a rose. I tend to analyze and synergize everything with nature. I'm a very keen gardener and I love every single thing about nature. And I see its parallels to living life. Hence, I chose to speak about from the blackest mud grow the whitest lilies. It is without doubt the truth of life. It is so absolutely fitting for a time like now, where us Jews collectively were in the blackest mud, losing our temple, and so much happening in the period of the 3 weeks, bringing us to the 9th of Av. That was black mud. And here we are, a people sitting in a shul, a magnificent shul, a whole collective, Jewish people with the land of Israel, one of the most successful in the world. And we are the white lilies from the black mud. Look at the analogy of the lily. There you see the stem. Inside there is the stamen with the pollen. This lily grows its best when it's in black, deep, dark mud. And that is exactly how I feel. I have grown in the mud of the loss of my best friend, my darling, my annoyer, my irritant, my fighting punching ball, and my absolute darling other half. And I can't go into length about the fact that the shock of hearing that your husband on his Vespa, that he loved riding so much after his morning breakfast, a ride that I would have been on, riding pillion behind him. And that Saturday before, he said, I don't want you coming with tomorrow. I just want it to be us guys. And I accepted, and I didn't go with him. And I'm standing here today to talk to you. I've always been a speaker for many, many years. And it's so crazy that in the last year, I've been asked to speak more than ever. And I know why. It's because people relate to the pain of others, even if they haven't had it. And the reason is because they believe, they hope that they too will come out of it, that they too have hope, and that they won't feel demise and destruction as a result of it. So it's good to hear somebody who's on the other end of the black mud. And I have to tell you, I didn't ever think I was going to lose my husband after 46 years of marriage. I was already planning in my head our 50th anniversary. I honestly loved the fact that we were two for the road. I even commissioned a painting that's hanging over my mantelpiece as a tribute to the wonderful life we had as two for the road, either in our Alpha Spider, in our saloon car, or on the Vespa, even on a BMW, even on a Harley. We were two for the road. And did we love it? Did we revel in it? But now I have to show you what happens when we've all had dark, tough times. And we just want that subtle assurance that things will change, and they do. It's so crazy that in this country, the synergy of this lily that I chose as my symbol of the talk tonight is in the spring. I walked into the foyer and there were a whole lot of the St. Joseph lilies from some kind of a syncretism facing me, masses of them, still waiting to open. There is a message for me in that. And I cannot tell you how the absolute promise of a lily, it's not my favorite flower, but on that stamen full of pollen is promise, production, potential. There will be more lilies because of this lily. And this lily came from black mud. The most beautiful flower, albeit that this may not be the best species, is the rose. I analogize life and my life as the rose. Why? At the end of it is the most exquisite flower. And along the way, there are thorns. Sometimes they're spaced apart, and sometimes they're very close together. Ariella, you experienced a rose where the thorns were very close together. But we all do. We all experience the thorns, and in the spaces between is our breathing space. We build up, we grow, we go forward, and ultimately, if we can get past all the thorns, we have the rose. And what is so strange about the rose? That it is transient like life. It lasts so short. It drops to the ground and it turns to be part of the mulch and fertilizer for the next lot of roses. And you've got to see life. Never do you have a rose without thorns, unless it's been in some kind of a shop that generically produces them. And so for me, it is a fitting analogy. And you must be asking, Raz, how come you've been so upwardly mobile, so buoyant, so happy to be alive, and you lost this husband of yours that we knew? We knew you were a partnership. And I know why. You see, when you've had a marriage, where, by the way, there was a lot of fighting, but you've had a marriage where you actually know that that human being is your other person. And you know that's the person you want to live your life out with. And you had such good times, such beautiful times. You springboard right into your life because you're alive. I made up my mind that I will never be part of the walking dead. There are too many people that became that during Corona. Even at the age of 26. You can become part of the walking dead by losing your zest for living, by forgetting what a privilege it is. That every morning when you say Modiani, you say it with fervor, you say it with joy and relish, because you've been given another day. And for me, it is that way. Another day. I don't know if I've got the whole day. Dennis didn't know. He was going to join us in a picnic. He had half a day. But once I know that I've got a day, I am ecstatic. I am surrounded by the love, as Ariella said, of my darling children, my darling sister, my family, my friends, the community. I am cosseted by them holding me up with that love. How can I not be full of joy? How can I not be grateful? And so let me tell you, from all the previous talks I've done, how I worked out that I could be so strong in the midst of such a tragedy. I had habituated myself for it over the years of writing a book on how to live your best life. I had seen, by having a fire in my home, what it felt like when all my material things were destroyed, and I felt liberated. It's a very different thing to lose things than to lose a neshama. And these are the things that got me through. These are my life mantras. Incorporate them into your life. You will see that they really do make a difference. I'm living proof of it. My Jewish faith, I've had lots of arguments with it. I still do. But I have such a love of it. And when I was a little girl, I grew up in a little country town. I was the defender of the faith. If there was anti-Semitism, they came to Raz, I would deal with it. And it's so crazy because I didn't have an observant household, but I had an intense love of God. I had an imaginary friend called God. And whenever anything went wrong, I didn't have to see anything substantial. The abstraction of God was with me, even as a little girl. And when hard times came, I knew I could never be alone because God was with me. And do you know that as I say God, I want to cry because I feel such a deep connection to this God. And Judaism has helped me bring me to that place. How has it done that? It's done that because a lot of us don't believe in God. My own father kept telling me there's no such a thing. We had umpteen arguments over the fact. And he was from Lithuania who experienced pogrom. And you know something? From our family emerged a rabbi and emerged a rebbitzin. And all because, funnily enough, the biggest anti-Semite, my father, didn't realize how he was pouring into us a different kind of love. And with that strength, I could then face the fire, the loss of my father, the loss of my mother, the loss of my brother, who was the youngest in family, and then the loss of my husband. And that has been life-changing. You become a widow. What a difference. Such a different status. Such a different status that you have to negotiate. So much so that from the black mud of the loss of him, I decided to grow a lily that is whiter than white and created a group called New Beginnings. So that all people who are alone, who come home and face the walls and the furniture on their own, have a place to come and enjoy wonderful stimulation, experiences, get-togethers. In fact, tomorrow we're all meeting at the Holocaust Museum because in the complete light of Tisha B'Av, these people are going to come and have a tour and a movie and the whole feel, but they're doing it together and not all alone. And so the white that comes from the lily also comes from feelings like this. This too shall pass. Do you know how I believe that? I know it. I've seen it. I've experienced it. The pain and the anguish and the suffering and the belief system that I actually had an evil eye on me because my husband was killed because everybody was jealous of my marriage and the way we lived our lives together. Who knows if it was true? But I know it's past because you see, I know God deigned at the very beginning when he was going to go. And my Jewish religion taught me too, that on Rosh Hashanah, we are judged and sealed on Yom Kippur. And I remember straight after the funeral, I said, it wasn't written in the book this year. And that's how I could accept it. And I've always been panic-stricken during Rosh Hashanah when we read that part, who will live and who will die. I have been always, before anything ever happened, I get the sense of panic. I wonder who's not going to be written in. And so it happened to me, face on. My enthusiasm for life has been my best friend. I've had it from childhood. And there's certain mantras I go by that I think literally build every one of the skeletal muscles in my body and help me through every single tough moment. Trust gut, sein gut, which the Rebbe shares with you. Because if you keep being negative and living in a pothole of black mud, you cannot bring good to you. You need positivity to draw yourself. You have to draw positivity to you. And to do so, you need to be in it. You have to think it. I was counseling, a friend of mine is having an op. She's petrified of this op. And she spoke to me the other day over coffee and she said, Raz, I've got to talk to you. I am so scared. I've had a collapse lung in the past. I've had this, that. She was recounting every single thing that could go wrong. In other words, she was really saying, I may die. Exactly. The person knows it. And I continue now what I listened to and I said, all I'm hearing is what's going to go wrong. Have you actually given one moment of thought to what's going to go right? That maybe because you're having this op, it's going to make a difference to your life. You're going to be able to walk better. You're going to be able to have a different value, a choice in life. And I said, I beg of you, where is your feeling of let go, let God? Take all this away and just sit down and every morning say, let go, let God. Because that's what I do. I'm a coward. I'm an absolute coward. I cop out as soon as I've done everything I can. My histadlus. I immediately say, let go, let God. And I swear to you, it is the relief of my life. And if you ever want to know where that came to literally rear its head, was on a trip with my husband and I in Italy with no GPS, having to get back to Rome in time before Shabbos and to fetch a lost passport. And I was sweating from anxiety to a point my head was wet. And I knew I was going to have a heart attack if I didn't let go of the anxiety. And suddenly I said, let go, let God. And suddenly I relaxed into it. What was going to happen was going to happen. And when we got to the embassy, believe it or not, we were too late and they told us they'd closed the doors. And my husband said, Raz, we can't, it's over. We're going to have to stay here. We'll never get back to South Africa as we thought we would on Monday. And I said, wait then, wait. We sat outside and the door, the actual gate of the actual driver's position opened because somebody had left late and I squashed through. And I went up to the people driving the car and I said, please, can I get in? Can I go inside? And he said, but we closed. And I said, no, I'm here, I've got to get in, I've got to get in. Is it open? And I did get in. And believe it or not, the woman looks at me, oh, she was so officious. I told you to be back here at 5 o'clock. I said, I'm so sorry, but she said, I'll check if it's here. Went upstairs, got my temporary passport, and sitting on a chair was a black lady sobbing. And I thought, oh God, what's going on? She was representing what I felt like inside. And I took my passport temporary and I went up to her and I said, what's the matter, my darling? She'd been at the Vatican and her entire bag with everything in her passport had been stolen. And I, a fellow South African, put my arms around her and gave her a bit of a drosha and then realized it was nearly time for Shabbos. And I ran out to my husband, waving the temporary passport, and I said, let go, let God. And it was exactly how I know for a fact that gate opened. So with those thoughts, with that positivity, I am in love with abundance, with the beauty of life. And all the losses I've had have pained me deeply, have left a part in me where I always feel my neshama is that size, a little bit shrunken, because all the people that were there in that neshama have gone, only to another plane. That's when my Judaism comes in again. Because I know there's a time before we born, a time after, from Olam Hazeh to Olam Haba, I'm totally convinced of it. I know that I'm actually not going to end when I end here. I'm going to be there. I don't know what it looks like, and I don't know what I look like. I know I won't be able to put on my lipstick and dress funny, but I certainly know I'm going to be there in awareness. And I can only say to all of you here that if you want to live your best life, even after a tragedy, and I say this now in the name of my beloved David Ben Michoel. David, you knew what I stood for. My book that you were so patient with when I was writing, in the very first chapter under the G for grace, said it all. God, for me, I cannot survive without my imaginary friend. Giving, I think that being able to give to others, giving dignity, giving respect, giving tzedakah, giving love, recognition, that's very powerful. Gratitude, being grateful for everything that you have. Growing, developing yourself, whether it be through a university, through a course, through a hobby, through reading, grow. And then don't ever forget, without those G's, you will not sustain living a good life. You need each and every one in them. And the final one, which announces and speaks to Ariella too. Ariella, I know when you were speaking, you grabbed from me the other G. I have go with it or go for it. When you're empowered, when you're full of enthusiasm, when you're up, go for it. But we're not like that. Too often, we're down, we're low, we ain't got the energy. And then you go with it. And you definitely can go with it. You allow yourself to just be miserable. I know I've sat and cried and just spoken to my husband aloud, and I'm sobbing and talking to him. And I'm going with it because I'm allowing it. And then my child will phone, one of my daughters, Ma, what's going on? I can hear your voice. And I'll say, and then they'll say, I can hear, Ma, you're going with it. It's true. It's exactly what I'm doing. They can hear it. So I give permission to everybody and myself to go with it. Because if you try on the top of the huge wave to fight the wave, you'll drown. Go with the wave. The likelihood is you'll get to the shore. And then you can put the go for it. And so in my final words, I say to you, Judaism, my mantras, my love of life, my love of God, which should be first, I want to share with you. And from Tisha B'Av outward, let this lily be what you look like. A white, beautiful lily. No matter what mud, because even as I speak, I know many are in mud. You're human. You're in Olam Hazeh. You're not in Olam Haba. And with that, my final word is that I will never allow myself to be a victim. That Noga therapy for me is the answer to how to live life. Viktor Frankl, his purpose and meaning, that to me is the way to live. And that's how the Holocaust survivors that survived, so many of them, they found a purpose. And my purpose, definitely, is you. I want others to learn to live and take on no victimhood and all the mantras I gave you so that you have a beautiful lily after you've been sitting on low chairs. And I thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, first of all, an incredible shkoya. Thank you, Raz, really amazing. As you were speaking, you reminded me, I met a friend of mine last week. He tells me he's standing at Seagulls and where Michella's is, and he sees this woman standing over there, drabby, angry, and he's like, "Are you okay? Everything's terrible, life is terrible, it's getting worse and worse." He's like, "Come on, what's your name?" She's like, "My name's Sarah." "Sarah, I'm sure there's something good in your life." "Nothing's good, everything's terrible, everything's horrible. Everything that could go wrong goes wrong." And this is the kind of guy that doesn't give up. So he starts pushing. "No, I'm sure there's something good going for you. I'm sure." "Everything's miserable." Okay, he gives up. She's walking with a bag to her car, and the bottom of the bag opens and everything falls on the floor. And he's like, "Shay, really, nothing does work for you." Basically, the bottom of the bag fell open and everything fell on the floor, like she's walking. So yeah, like it was just like, okay. Well, I hope we have a better attitude. And Ross, thank you so much for that. Our final speaker for tonight is one of my favorite speakers. She's spoken quite a few times to our community, and each time it's amazing. And personally, for me, when I was going through grief and loss, Karen was the most amazing therapist. And every time I am dealing with a family that's going through intense pain, the one thing I always say is you have to go to Karen Marcus. So 2 sessions with her and my whole head went back straight. So thank you so much, Karen. I look forward to hearing your words.
It was daunting to stand up here, and no matter how many times one stands up to speak, there's never a time that I don't stand up and feel absolutely terrified. I must put it on, hold it closer. Okay, I'll hold it closer. I hate these microphones, also you feel quite stuck to it, but I'll do my best. Your courage is absolutely applaudable. To see you stand up and speak your story it's heartwarming and courageous, and there are no words, truly. There are no words. And Raz, I've known you since I was a little girl. Where are you sitting? Since I was a little girl. And just stand to watch you speak. And my husband, I know her. Like I know her for long. She's incredible. But Raz, wow. So you brought the lily, which is your metaphor. And I often use the ocean as my metaphor, but it's too big to bring to a talk like this. So I try to make reference to it in other ways. So I am a logotherapist. I studied logotherapy and a clinical social worker. Is it not on? Wow, you're all doing this to me. I think it's on. No, it's on. Yeah, okay. Grab out to the rescue.
Good for something.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course it's on.
Maybe I speak really softly. Okay. So I was saying I'm a logotherapist by profession and a social worker, and often is asked of me, why did I choose to become a logotherapist? Why did I go that route? And my history is as a social worker working at hospice, actually, in the field of death and dying. And so often one would sit with patients and they would be struggling with the suffering and the purpose of life and why is this happening? And no matter how many social working skills one had at the time, nothing seemed sufficient enough to understand the existential question that was being asked. And that existential question was, what is life about? How do I make sense of what's happening? And somehow logotherapy talks to that part of the person that's questioning life and questioning suffering. A lot of what I'll talk of just now in my talk are my mantras and what's helped me to work with the patients in my practice as well as my own life story. When I was 11, my father died in a plane crash. And that for me was the start of my journey in who I was to become. Little was I aware that at the age of 11, one day I'd find myself specializing in bereavement work and working a lot with children and people who have lost loved ones. And I almost feel like somehow in the depth of that dark mud, Raz, that you speak of, is what we call post-traumatic growth. And actually out of the mud comes incredible growth as a result of trauma. And I often think that I didn't choose my profession. My profession chose me. And I never even call it a job, because there's not a day that I leave my office feeling like I went to work. There is every day I leave my office and I feel absolutely inspired by the sacred privilege of being able to walk a journey with people in the midst of and the pit of their suffering. You bring that living. And often people will say to me, why do you do this work? You know, I've been doing it for the last 25 years actually. And they say, why would you do this work? Go and work corporate, go and work in a happy environment. And I always say that environment, I think, would kill me. That's not my space. But when you work with people who come to you as a flower that's almost dying and so depleted, and through their own triumph of their spirit, not through a good bereavement therapist, but through their own inner resource, leads the therapy process alive and reaching out for that sun, that is why we do the work that we do. Another important feature of the work that we do is really just, and working with people, is sometimes being able to stand in the storm. I loved your title of the talk about how do we anchor ourselves in stormy seas and in storms. I often use the storm as a metaphor for understanding either our emotional self or experiences that we're going through in life. Very often what we go through is like a raging thunderstorm that is pelting hail down on us. The most important feature of any storm is that this too shall pass. Any of us have ever seen a storm that never ended. Somehow it's the fear of the storm, it's the viciousness of the storm that feels so frightening. And when you're in it, you almost feel like, will this ever end? The truth is, no storm has ever not ended. An amazing feature of any storm is that the sun always comes out after. And sometimes there's even an exquisite rainbow. And often what people need to hear is, right now you're in the storm. And it's okay, I'm standing here with you. It's okay if we even get wet. It's okay if we have nowhere to hide. We're going to stand in the storm, because I promise you that that storm will end. And I promise you, when it does, you will see that there's elements of a rainbow. And more than that, so often a storm allows growth. The storm allows for that black soil to nourish the plants that are growing in it. And very often, that feeling of our darkest times is the thunderstorm that eventually does pass. Similar to that is our emotions. And in times of stress, I often use that analogy and saying to people, whatever you're feeling now is like a storm, it's like a rain, but that too shall pass. That fear that you're feeling, the anxiety, it's a cloud in the sky. It's going to pass over you. The difficulty is, as in our human nature, we often quite avoidant of the storm or avoidant of hard feelings. So we tend to push them away. But if we imagine pushing clouds away, all that we're doing is creating an incredible buildup of these pressure clouds. And eventually when we allow it to come out, it's big. And I often say, don't do that. Rather embrace those storms. Sometimes they're little thunder, like little rains, and sometimes they're huge, but allow that to pass across the sky. There's a beautiful saying that says we can't change the direction of the wind, but we can adjust our sails. And so often the work that one does in stressful times and in adversity is really recalibrating and adjusting to what life is giving us. So what have been the wisdoms or the mindsets, as I said I actually quickly looked at the title now, I'm thinking, oops, what have been the mindsets? I tend to stand up and just want to talk about how people deal with suffering and pain, because that's what we see so much around us. But what are some of the tools that I've found useful over the last few years? Interestingly enough, what COVID and what the last few years have given us is permission to admit vulnerability. And it's interesting, because prior to COVID, people were very ashamed to admit vulnerability. COVID allowed permission for that, and somehow made it okay, because my vulnerability was because of something happening external to me. So a lot more people actually came forward struggling and with their struggles because it felt okay to do so. There was less shame in vulnerability. Even men, absolutely, thank you. Men, boys, people who previously were identified as being strong and coping, even the strongest businessmen who come forward and go, we all need help, my team needs help. I need help, I don't know how to manage the grief in my team. Somehow gave incredible permission for vulnerability. The question then is, how do we help people with that vulnerability?
There's an author by the name of Seligman, and he put forward 3 Ps. And to me, they're really fantastic. They're quick and easy reference to go to. His first P is the notion of personalization. But very often when we're in crisis and vulnerable, we tend to personalize and think it's something we did, something that just happens to me. It's just happening to me. I had a role to play in this. And the most important thing is to stop and go, you didn't cause this. This is happening to you, but it's happening to a lot of people too. What was bandied about in COVID was we're all in the same ship. We're all in the same ship. And I used to say, we're all in the same ocean, but our ships are very different. We're not all in the same ship. My ship is not your ship. Your ship is not my ship, but our oceans might be similar. So to not personalize is to really internalize that principle of this isn't just me and it's not just about me. The second P that he puts forward is permanence. Again, rationalizing with what you're saying of this too shall pass. Nothing is permanent. No, the good is not permanent and the bad is not permanent. Which also brings in the value of impermanence. Is everything in life shall change, is to really hold on to it to make the most of now. In my head, I jump around a lot because I've got a million things I want to say. So in relation to the permanence of it, there's a wonderful title of a book by Scott O'Neill that says, be where your feet are. Just think about that for a second. Be where your feet are. How often now in our world are we not where our feet are? Our feet are here, but we're already thinking, I better get home. What happens if there's load shedding? There's no light. Tomorrow, the next day, that's not where our feet are. Be where your feet are. It's a magnificent, I find it spilling out my mouth at the moment in my practice because if no one is where their feet are. We where our eyes are, where our phones are, we where our heads are, but just being where your feet are is in the moment. And the last P that he speaks of is the pervasiveness of crisis and the pervasiveness of difficult times is to really realize that what we're going through right now shouldn't pervade every part of our life. It can't spill over onto everything. We need to allow for whatever we're going through to be contained and to be managed and not allow it to spill over. I'm adding the 4th P and I'm saying perseverance. That so often what we have to do in life is be able to persevere. We tend to want to fight flight. We tend to want to be able not endure hard times. One of the most important qualities of being human is the ability for me, I believe, to persevere the storm, is to be able to stand in the storm, to get soaking wet and to know that I will survive the storm and I will be okay. When you spoke of your story, you persevered the year. I hear what you're saying. There were days where to get out of bed almost felt, why wake up to my reality again? I don't even want to wake up tomorrow. Yet you endured and you persevered. And that for me is the most incredible human quality of being able to really deal with life and to be able to wake up and keep going that next day. Other mantras and other mindsets that have helped me is to also understand what's called the dual process of coping with grief. I know we're time limited and I'm going to just tell it in a nutshell. And I'm going to refer to your words at Raz, is where you said, get on with it. There was one, you said get, I wrote it down here as you were speaking. Not let go, let God. It was go with and get on with. So the dual process of coping with grief, and I'll type to the theory for you because it's so smart, is it says that how we cope with grief is in a dual response to crisis, not even just grief, it could be a crisis. Our intrinsic self wants to be restorative and get on with it, but the other process within us wants to deal with the pain of whatever's happened, the crisis, the pain, the loss. Healthy processing of any life crisis is the ability to oscillate between go with it, the grief, the pain, and get on with it, the ability to restore. So what we have to really realize is those two principles are fundamental to coping with crisis. So we have to allow time to go with it. When people are too restorative, it worries me. I think it's amazing because they're highly functional and people around them are less panicky, but they haven't for 1 minute just sat with it. And the people that sit too long and don't get on with it worry me too, because somehow one has to be able to find the restorative self. So just hold that in mind. It's tied to a theory that go with it and get on with it. Another beautiful saying that I often say to people is the antidote to depression is play. The antidote to depression is play. But what is play? Play is different things for all of us. But how often do we pass up opportunities to play? And play could be anything. Even those with grandchildren, young children, siblings. When we're in the darkest of our times, the last thing we feel like doing is playing. But actually, that's the most wonderful, wonderful gift that's been given to you, is when a child or someone says, just come kick a ball, just come tell me a story. That's an antidote to depression, is play. Another important element, and you spoke of the from logotherapy, the idea of the concentration camps. And an important thing what I often say to people is those who survive the camps, not necessarily physically, but emotionally, were the prisoners that believed there was life outside and beyond the camp. And that's such an important principle when you're in stress and in crisis, is to know that there is life beyond this. There has to be life beyond this. The metaphor often used for that is the lighthouse, is that when our boat is in those dark oceans and we feel like we're drowning, we have to keep our eye on that lighthouse. We have to keep an eye on, right now, I'm in the ocean, but I'm going to get to shore. And we have to keep an eye on that lighthouse. Another wonderful thing that I came across, and it was Trevor Waller who said it, he said Monday before Tuesday. And that for me is a wonderful way of dealing with life, is that when we're in crisis and we tend to overshoot the runway and we worrying about everything that's ahead of us, is Monday before Tuesday, is deal with today before tomorrow. So often people come for therapy and they want to know how's it going to be in a year? How am I going to cope? And I always say, we don't know what a year looks like, but we know what tomorrow can look like. Let's worry about how you're going to do tomorrow. So Monday before Tuesday. And also an important thing is to just give permission to one's humanness, is to really realize that in our humanness, there's a vulnerability. And in our vulnerability, we have to have an accurate expectation of self, which an expectation of self is to realize it's okay to feel what we're feeling. But in that is also the expectation of self to know that I have the strength in me to be able to have the triumph of the spirit and to be able to put one foot in front of the other. We often ask the question of why. And as Viktor Frankl says, it's when you can understand the why, you can understand the how. And I think so often that's important too, is that we've got to find a meaning and a reason for what we're doing and why we're doing it. Brené Brown said a beautiful, and I want to just pull it together. Brené Brown had the most wonderful quote. She said, when a person has another person, I really think I read it of Raz, when a person tells their story of how they overcame hardship, you don't realize how that is somebody else's survival guide. That everyone sitting here tonight and those on Zoom can really take everything that's been said and use it as their survival guide. Because what often people need to see is evidence of survival. Is so often people will come to me and say, Karen, well, I survived this. I'm not going to get through this. And I often say, when you look around, have you seen people that have gone through loss, through trauma, through any hardship? And I go, of course, these people are all around. And I go, that's your evidence of survival. Don't underestimate that you can do this, but it's one step at a time. And often it's really being able to, and I say this because we tend to want to make better and tell people it will be okay, and there's reason. The most important thing we can do with people who are going through difficult times is stand in the rain with them, offer to hold the umbrella and just stand in the rain. Because when you know that somebody's standing next to you, it's somebody is bearing witness to your suffering. And in that moment, it feels that there's that person to stand and to protect you from the weather. We've all spoken of, everybody made reference to it also, is a belief and a faith. And I often look at my own life and I think I could never have known that what would have happened to me as a child, as I said, would have set me on a path of doing the work that I do. But I have the utmost faith that that was part of my plan in this world. And we speak of oceans. We speak, as I said, I always use the ocean, of how sometimes even a riptide, there's that sense that you don't fight it. The ocean will eventually churn you out. And I always say that for me, the ocean was a dark place. It was a place that swallowed up an airplane. But at the same time, in Reframe, it became a resting place, a place that held an neshama for me that was one of the most important people in my life. And I had to really work with that notion of the ocean. And then I met my sugar husband, who is an ocean swimmer, who swims hundreds and hundreds of kilometers to and from Robben Island and back. And my friends say to me, but are you not scared of sharks? And I often say, no, because if a plane can fall out of the sky, which doesn't happen, I'm not scared of the shark. And at the same time, I have to have the utmost faith and trust that whatever is in store for me, I will have the strength to do it. I was speaking to someone the other day who was about to also endure something difficult. And the person was very anxious and wondering, how's she going to do this? Is it going to be okay? And I said, doesn't matter the outcome, and don't ask God to change it. Just tell God, whatever the plan is, give me the strength to do it. And I just say to each and every one of us here tonight, it was a privilege to stand here, and that if we could all tattoo our story, or not tattoo, if we could all write our story somewhere on us, we would have that much more admiration, respect, and just the human nature is awe-inspiring. The strength that we all have in us and in each other. We have a unique community that we all pull together, that we have the strength inside and outside to be able to actually anchor ourselves and weather any storm. But don't think you can run from the storm. Stand in it, because that too shall pass. And I just wish you all strength and love, and yeah, may we all grow like those flowers out of the brown mud. And when you have a chance, Google post-traumatic growth, because it's that out of our mud, we grow around and through our trauma to become a person that we never knew we were capable of being. So thank you again for your courage to stand here. I always learn something from each person, because it took me a long time to also stand up and be able to share my story. And Raz, wow, thank you. And thank you, Rabbi, for hosting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate it, and thank you for your incredible words, and thank you to all our speakers, and thanks to all of you that came out, and to all of you 53 people on Zoom. Thank you for being here, and I just want to use this opportunity of wishing Dan and Melanie, who are going on their own journey this week, their own seas, lots of strength and success, and we're with you on this journey. And thank you all. I'm wishing you all an easy and meaningful fast, and may we all walk into a better world. Amen. Thank you.